Sharad Pawar, the uncle of Ajit Pawar, the patriarch of the NCP family, has reached Baramati. This is, remember, the family's bastion. The relationship between Sharad Pawar and Ajit Pawar had been troubled for a while now. These are first pictures of Sharad Pawar landing in Baramati, and he will be with the family of his nephew Ajit Pawar as he takes things forward. Padmaja, you've just returned from Maharashtra. I want you to talk about these pictures because you've seen this up close.
One can't even imagine what it must be like for the party patriarch. Like we'd been discussing earlier, this is a family that might have split politically, but the parivar was as rock solid as it can get. And that is perhaps the reason why the Agadi was always kept guessing a little bit by Sharad Pawar. They called him the wily old fox of Maharashtra politics. Somebody who split from the Congress, on the issue of Sonia Gandhi's nationality, then became a part of that same government. And his nephew was seen as the inheritor of his legacy. Somebody who was rough and ready. When it came to Baramati, they said unki tuti bolti thi. In Baramati, Ajit Pawar, Dada was the final word. Yeah. And the succession, you speak to anyone in Maharashtra, they were quite clear that when it comes to the political legacy, managing the NCP, the nuts and bolts of the party were all within the control of Ajit Pawar. And Supriya Sule was the face of the party in Delhi. So, now she is a Lok Sabha member, but she was the more urbane, the more suave face of the party, who would represent it in parliament. She spoke during Operation Sindoor. But when it came to really mobilizing the cadre, it was Ajit Pawar who really would be the inheritor. So when he split, it was seen as a huge setback for Sharad Pawar. Then, in the last few months, when you had the results of the assembly election come in and you saw huge reverses for Sharad Pawar's party, they lost out the symbol, they lost out the ghadi to Ajit Pawar's faction. So they had a new election symbol of the tutari, didn't do as well as expected in the assembly election. And a lot of talk about how in the run-up to 2029, this family has decided that their political future is in staying together, not just as a parivar, but also as a political... But was it going
to happen when you were reporting on the ground in Maharashtra, Padmaja? Did it seem like this was imminent? It's incredible to think now that, with Ajit Pawar gone, first of all, what happens to what we call the Ajit Pawar faction, which is the NCP with the clock symbol. But now with him gone, is that reunion, or you can't even call it a reunion anymore? Is it a kind of re-merger inevitable now?
I mean, what do you think? I mean, what would happen? Because here you've got the senior most party leader. Remember, Sunitra Pawar, despite the fact that Ajit Pawar threw his might behind her, eventually lost from Baramati. His party did okay, but she lost in their bastion. Correct. So in Baramati, it was still Sharad Pawar, and Sharad Pawar went to campaign to ensure that Supriya Sule wins. So, all of this, now what happens to the NCP? But again, what happens to Sharad Pawar at this stage in life? And you remember that iconic picture when he was campaigning in the last election, it started raining and Sharad Pawar continued with his bhashan, and there was this backlit picture of him and everyone was like, here is an octogenarian, he's perhaps fighting the last election, or he's campaigning for the last election of his life. He is now going to be in the background, and hand over the reins of his party to his daughter and to his nephew. But now to suffer a loss like this, it's going to be massive. What happens to the NCP? What happens to the Mahayuti? Are there going to be a rejigging of, equations? Is the NCP, if there's a merger of sorts, going to be with the Mahayuti now in its entirety, including Sharad Pawar's faction and Ajit Pawar's faction? These are all important questions. But right now, of course, I think everyone is just beginning to even digest the implications of what has happened. But for this one gentleman, the enormity of this loss simply cannot be underscored.
I would hazard to say that the stakeholders and the parties involved will not have the luxury of time to not to take a decision very quickly as to what happens to the NCP. Once the last rites of Ajit Pawar take place today or tomorrow, and once the 3-day state mourning is done, Padmaja and Vedika, the NCP will have to move fast because these are parties that have cadres. These are parties that have Zilla Parishad elections to fight. You know, there is work to be done. As tragic as the passing of Ajit Pawar is, these are political entities that are election machines in their own right, and they've got to have that impulse to move forward, and they undoubtedly will. But I agree with Padmaja when she says, digesting what has happened, and you know, if you look at our ticker, we've got an element there that talks about the multiple voids that Ajit Pawar actually leaves behind. It gives you a sense of how difficult it's going to be to pick up the pieces. Death comes as the end. You know, death is the end. In many ways, Ajit Pawar was the successor, but there's a void ahead of him. You know, who next? Who after him? With the same kinds of capabilities, with the same kind of stature to stand up to someone as powerful and towering as his uncle and break away from the NCP.
Fairly young politically, you know, only 66 years old.
66 years old.
That is very young in a political life. And I remember there was this speech where Devendra Fadnavis went, and you know, these three men, you know, they had a lot of ribbing, you had a lot of back and forth between them. I think a couple of months ago, you had Ajit Pawar when, you know, the three of them, in fact, a year ago after the assembly results came out, you had Eknath Shinde, Devendra Fadnavis, Ajit Pawar, and reporters kept asking Eknath Shinde, "आप भी क्या deputy CM की oath लेंगे नहीं लेंगे?" And suddenly Ajit Pawar piped up and he said, "मुझे इनका नहीं पता, पर मैं तो कल सुबह जरूर ये oath ले रहा हूँ."